survive complexity. And that worries me because climate change is a complex systems problem. We'll talk about that in a minute. So is healthcare. So is national defense. So is education. All of these problems are not amenable to generally simple answers. They all have claimants of truth who will give you the absolute certain line. And what I keep telling people is watch out for the mythbusters and the truth tellers. Who's talking in probabilities and ranges and showing us things that he did. So anyhow, back to this. So this cartoon is only 2 days old, so I had to use it. All right, so after comprehensive review of the climate science, we have concluded that climate change is 99.5% certain. I might have said 99. All right, actually it depends what question, but the cartoon's good. Not 100% as we previously stated. I knew it. It's a hoax. That's almost, it's a joke, but that's exactly what's been going on. And the thing is, it's not funny because the joke's on us, especially on our children, grandchildren, and the rest of nature. And I spend a lot of my time exposing the real hoaxsters. The new Joe McCarthy reincarnate Senator Inhofe, but that's another story. So I like to call this meteorology. You know, how do you deal out there? It's very difficult because if you do not understand the context of the soundbite world, you don't understand that scientists tend to be exceedingly bad at clear communications. Have any of you noticed that? We do what the journalists say, we bury our lead. So what we do is we start out with a whole page of caveats, and then on the bottom we say, but we could, under this circumstance, which has at least a 50% chance, lead to 25% of the extinction of existing species. Oh, and I think maybe that's concerning. I think maybe that should be the headline, and then you can put the caveats, and you can be certain that the opponents who want to tell you, like from the Western Fuels Association, the coal lobby, they're going to tell you carbon dioxide is a fertilizer of green plants and it's good for you. You know what? It is a fertilizer of green plants, but it also fertilizes weeds and the things that cause allergies and pollen. Oh, and by the way, it acidifies the oceans, threatening the food chain at the bottom. Oops, they forgot to tell you those two because it's not their job to make their opponent's case. They're like good trial lawyers. Their job is to win for the client. Client's fossil fuel industry or the ideologues of no government control, and they're in a war. And in the war, all's fair, so we use these arguments. Now it's up to the public to cut through that. So what we need is a public literate enough to recognize that 80% of what we hear is going to be spun and is literally the north end of a southbound horse. And that takes high degree of public literacy. How many people here are Californians? Almost all of you. How many vote in these elections where we have to pick things? How many actually spend the time you think you need to be really prepared to understand these complex ballot initiatives, sometimes invert with wording deliberately inverted to make you fooled and so forth? I can't say I can. I end up, and I admit this, so half the time if I know something about it, I might do my due diligence and try to look it up on the webs. But in the end, I go to the League of Women Voters, I see who's supporting it, see who isn't, see who I trust, and I trust them. That's not a very good way to run a democracy. So when we're going to have democracy going too far in the participatory direction, then there's a very high call for public understanding. Rather than a representative direction, where what we do is we elect public officials based on that we hope they have coincident values with ours, and instead we expect them to hire staff to get them the information. So in this cacophony, that's why I'm spending so much time in this framing, because I really believe it gets in the way of game-changing technology implementation, especially in the US. Okay, it's in there. I've already waived it. All right, how much do we value these guys? You know, it's really very hard to say. There are some people who consider that the destruction of species is an absolutely morally unacceptable thing. There are others who say, but how do I put it in my cost-benefit analysis and what do I discount them at? And that is not a solved problem because cost-benefit analysis is not simply an analytic calculus. It's a value judgment that dollarization and discounting is more important than existence. That is not a professional judgment. I'm sorry if there are economists here. That's a personal value judgment. Which is the correct value judgment? That's what we have a political world for. We have to adjudicate the relative importance of equity, of species, of costs, and all of that has to be done in a way that fits into the framework of the existing resources that we have, which is not adequate to solve all problems. So what do we do in science? Risk. Risk is what can happen multiplied times the probability it can happen. That's our objective job. That's what IPCC does. And we, in fact, list every conclusion with confidence levels. With, if you say very likely, it means more than 9 out of 10. We've actually got them linked. But what's making a decision? Risk management. Who's best at that? Businesses. So I spend, as you correctly introduced me, more time talking to corporate people because they actually understand risk management. They know. Talk to an investment banker, right? They've got this portfolio. Well, they're not going to put it all into risky high return because they could lose their shirts. So assuming that we're not talking Ponzi's, you know, honest people, but they don't have perfect knowledge of the future. So they're going to take a third of their portfolio and put it into relatively safe, relatively low return, maybe a third into the middle and a third in the other. And then the aggressive ones might be a half, a quarter, and a quarter. And then you, in your value judgments, pick, given your family circumstance, which kind of philosophy you want to go to. That's risk management. Corporates are good at that. And in essence, those of us in academics are much less good. And what we really have to do is realize that these are value trade-offs that have to be made across incommensurates at a time when we do not have infinite amount of resources to solve all problems. So how do you rank them? Well, you can't rank them if people don't have some understanding about risk. That's the what can happen, what are the odds. And how do you get that when the thing is dumbed down into end of the world and good for you extremes in the media, the two lowest probability outcomes? So now with that happy picture, let's move on. Not everything that changes is bad, right? The good news is the current rate of global warming, swim over there and eat them in under 5 years. Right? I took this picture last summer in Svalbard, and there were 1,200 tourists who paid a lot of money to come to a fjord that had always been iced in until last year. So as far as they're concerned, they're making money. So melt that ice. Good for the shipping industry, good for the tourist industry, good for the people selling you, the housing and the other stuff. On the other hand, it's not good for everybody, and some people protest it. These are some of my favorite protesters, right? I want to do is, it's a tipping point is the point I want to get to. Here's what we worry about. What's a tipping point to lose these poor guys, right? Freezing. Actually, it's not true, because you can still melt them even when it's below freezing if the sun is strong. But never mind, I can't help it. I'm a scientist. I have to say it's never that simple. So a tipping point means you cross a threshold after which it irreversibly goes to a new state. The way I generally can get audiences to understand that is, if you live in a hilly area and your kids go to school in a school bus, and it goes over a hill, as soon as it reaches the top of the hill and comes down, you've now crossed a gravitational tipping point. That bus is going to continue to accelerate and increase pickup speed, unless, of course, there are two interventions of intelligence and energy. One is there's a driver who knows what she's doing, and number two is they've done the brakes. Well, all of us don't worry because we know that due diligence is practiced, almost all the time. But we're talking about a planet. And in this planet, who's the driver? Are you kidding? It's a bunch of quarreling teenagers. We don't even know if it has brakes. So the problem is that we worry about, are there certain levels of warming that you irreversibly melt Greenland with a 5-meter commitment? And when will you know that? Not until well after it's committed, because it starts slow and then it takes off. Oops! Remember, how many of you are old enough to remember the old days of Saturday Night Live, when Gilda Radner would play this person and she'd always make a mistake, and in the end she would say, never mind? Well, with tipping points, there's no planetary never mind. Here's our problem. We know there are plenty of them. There are thresholds for extinctions, there are others. We do not, as honest scientists, know precisely where they are. Even when I gave you this as a joke, I told you it's not even freezing because it depends on the sun. So what you know is that as you increase the temperature, you're increasing the number of systems that will be harmed and the depth of the harm. The precise level where it is, you can't know that. That's beyond our knowledge base. Back to risk management. So again, to get game-changing behavior, we have to have people understand that what we're talking about is taking significant risks with our planetary life support system, not a certain knowledge of a number of degrees. Now that 2-degree limit, which I support,